I just changed the settings to allow everyone to bypass the lobby, so hopefully there's no more dings. My name is Chris Brown. I'm the National HVRP lead for the Department of Labor, Veterans Employment and Training Service, and if you're signed on to listen to the listening session on VPL 0424 HVRP Award Amendments and Grant Officer Memorandum 0124 on incremental funding procedures for program year 24, you're in the right place. I'm going to turn off my camera so it allows me to focus on my notes as well as monitor the chat. This meeting itself is being recorded. The meeting, the slide presentation, and a very robust Q&A based on the questions that you pose either verbally or in the chat will be provided in the coming weeks, much like the National Veterans Technical Assistance Center emailed out today. Our listening session presentation, recording, and Q&A from December. So be a little bit more early. We're hopefully going to get these resources over to you prior to the incremental funding amendments being due in February. So that's me, Chris Brown. Last I met with you before the holidays and we talked about VPL 0324 HVRP performance management and reporting. Yes, this meeting is being recorded. It is actually being not recorded using the Microsoft Teams feature, but it is using a screen recording device by our contractors. It's awful. So you won't see the traditional Teams recording view. It's more of just recording the presentation that's going on and capturing all the audio on the screen. So today's agenda, just if everyone can be mindful of, if you don't want to be on camera, turn off your camera. And if you don't want to be heard unless you're asking a question, please just do a mic check.
Sir.
All right. Today's agenda. To start, we'll have a brief word from NVTI's program manager, Brandon Webb. We'll go over VPL 0424 as a matter of an overview of it, the types of amendments, and then the difference between this type of policy document and the ones that its predecessors were. We also identify changes that don't require an official award amendment. We'll talk about the technical assistance guide that accompanies this policy, as well as the nice table that is within the tag and how to read it. We'll also talk about recipient resources for Grant Solutions, as Grant Solutions has made a few updates to their dashboard in terms of like the viewability for the user, if they have a classic mode and they have a new mode. And then we'll go into a brief pause for questions, and then we'll jump into incremental funding, which will be a little bit more prescriptive for our grant recipients. I do have some of the latest screen shares from Grant Solutions, but the difference between last year and this year, I know we do have grant recipients that have newer staff, but we don't have Grant Solutions online to provide any type of a walkthrough. But the SNPs and aids in this presentation are just from that, and the training resources and hyperlinks that are inside to this presentation. Grant Solutions has beefed up their ability to provide all sorts of desk aids for the users, and that includes also our vet staff, because we are users of Grant Solutions. Vets pays Grant Solutions for you to use it and for us to administer your grants through it. So we both have different sets of guides, and I'll go through those resources. But before we kick off the fun policy stuff, I wanted to turn it over to my colleague and NVTI program manager, Brandon Webb.
All right. Thank you, Chris. So Happy New Year, everyone. I want to thank Chris for giving me the opportunity to talk to you all about NVTI and the training that is related to you and the work that you were doing. I'm hoping, we can go ahead and move to the next slide, Chris. I'm hoping that one of your New Year's resolutions was to be less stressed in 2024. I know I had enough of that in 2023. So the new me, you know, the new year, new me kind of thing is going to be less stress. So MBTI is going to help you out with that. We're actually piloting a course, Preventing and Healing Burnout in Veteran Service Providers, and that's you all. I know you all are working hard, and what comes along with hard work is a little bit of stress, and so it's important that we have a good work-life balance and making sure that we're taking care of ourselves, because if we're not the best versions of ourselves, then we're not going to be able to provide the services that we know we really can provide. And so January 25th, there's going to be a pilot course. You may have seen the original solicitation email that went out. It asked for auditors and students and participants. We got plenty of auditors, but I highly encourage that you register for this course and enroll it and check it out. It's a one-day virtual course. Really good information. I think you'll learn something in this course. So check this one out. We can move to the next slide. So focus groups. MBTI is going to be actually hosting 4 separate focus groups this year, and in fact in the next couple months, to gain some insights on the program's existing products and how we can pave a path for the future and what we need to be developing and updating based on the work that you all do and the needs that you all have. So the 2 of the focus groups are going to be HVRP related. We're going to be looking for staff that have certain criteria this time around. And MBTI gave me a list of those staff. So the HVRP staff focus group is going to be February 8th, and we're going to look for 3 staff with 2 years or less in the role, and 3 staff, excuse me, that have taken an MBTI course in the last year. And then there's going to be a supervisors focus group, and that's going to be a mix of HVRP and JVSG supervisors. And so there'll be 3 of each from each program. And what we're looking for is staff that have completed an MBTI class in the last year. And we implemented this criteria because we want to make sure that the information and the questions that we're asking in this focus group, the folks that are attending are going to have some relevant information, some new information, stuff that we can take action on. Really good conversations in this focus group. So I know that's not a lot of staff, 6 staff, and there's literally thousands of you all out there. So I apologize if you don't get into the focus group. They usually fill up in just a matter of hours of the emails going out. So again, I apologize if you don't get into it, but we're going to continue to host focus groups in the future. And so we'll make sure that there's more opportunities available. Next slide, Chris. So I wanted to reinforce a couple things that we updated this past year. And one of them is a journey map and a veteran service provider certificate program. So we actually have an HVRP journey map. One of the questions that is asked quite a lot is, what does MBTI offer my new staff? What would be good for an HVRP staff member to take? And so we created a journey map, and it provides recommendations in time increments. So it'll be, in the first week, here's what you should be checking out. In months 0 to 3, it'd be good for you to take these courses. 3 to 6, 6 to 12, and so it goes on and on until you get to the 24-month mark. But I just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware these are only recommendations. These are not mandates by DOL or vets that you take them in this order. You may see something in month 18, and you're like, I want to take that the first course I take. Jump on it. No holds barred. So take a look at that journey map, and if you have new staff, and one thing that we do know is that there's a lot of turnover. When someone new comes on board, shoot them this journey map. Have them take a look at it. Talk to them about it. And the other thing I would recommend is that you enroll in the Veteran Service Provider Certificate Program. What we did was we piloted the certificate program with the JVSG staff, got that up and running for about a year now. And then we implemented the Veteran Service Provider Certificate Program. And so this is a good way for your staff to get recognized and achieve a certificate, whether it's an MBTI professional or the top level, the thought leader level, and receive some credibility when they're out talking to other veterans or at the job fair or in their signature blocks. Great opportunity to get a certificate for a lot of courses that they've probably already taken. So I linked those up, the guide and the actual infographic map that'll show you exactly what courses are due in each track level. If you have any questions about the journey map or the certificate program, happy to take those questions or shoot me an email, or we can set up a meeting. Always love to chat. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share some courses that have a lot of open seats in them. So these are great opportunities and really good courses to get involved with and get some training on. You can see there's 3 there in January 23rd through the 25th, the Business Driven Workforce Solutions, and the LIVS course, the Leadership for Integration and Veteran Services. That's a manager's supervisor focused course. The Unconscious Bias course, highly recommend this course for anybody that deals with veterans in general, or sits face to face with a veteran, or deals with the public. This is one that you're going to find out a lot about yourself and some of the biases that you may have you don't even realize you have, and that goes along with all of us. We all project things, say things, look a certain way without even realizing that we're making some of these expressions or saying certain things that may be triggering or offensive to somebody that we you just don't know. And so it's a good way to learn a lot about yourself and how you can provide a service to those veterans without kind of being offensive in some way or another. And then the special populations courses, just kind of a quick word about these ones. We reformatted all these courses. They're one-day virtual courses. And so that you can see these are all subjects that you all probably deal with, serving veterans with substance use disorders, serving American and Alaskan Native veterans, and serving rural veterans. Exactly what you all do. So highly recommend enrolling in these one-day virtual courses. You'll learn a lot. We get such good reviews on these courses. Everybody that takes them just is kind of blown away by the good information and things that they learn. So I do see a few questions in the chat. I'll address those questions if I have time, Chris. If not, I'll just address them in the chat.
Brandon. You do, Brandon.
Okay. Okay, good deal. Thank you. So let's take a look at the questions. I think that was the last slide I have. I believe it was. Yeah. So Let's see. There is a question. The course is full. Next is the May 7th course. Okay. Isn't the Unconscious Bias course full? I was just told that it had a couple open seats left in there. So if it is full, I apologize, but I'm being told that it does have some openings. But what will happen is if you submit an application for that course, the register, MBTI register, will let you know if there's availability or if it's full and when the next opportunity is. It says the link is broken to the journey map. Oh, that's no good. So what I'll do real quick, I actually have it right here. I'll throw it in the chat. There you go. Let's see. One of the issues I heard from staff is that the amount of homework that is involved. Is it difficult for us to require staff to work on their own time? Let's see. Dr. Lore, are you referring to any of the classes or a specific class? I'm not sure if you want to jump on.
Can I take a message?
If when she gets a moment, she can call me back.
Perfect. I'll let her know.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Vic. So I'll say this with the special populations courses. There is a prerequisite course that is involved with that one. That's the only work that would be required outside of the course that is being attended. Everything else is provided and done within the time frame of the course. So if you're taking a one-day special populations course, there is a prerequisite course that is required, but it only takes a couple hours to knock out that prerequisite. It's a self-paced course. It only takes a couple hours to knock out that prerequisite. And then you take the whatever special populations course, the one-day virtual course that you enroll in. There's no homework outside of that. So I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to or not.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Brandon.
Hannah. Yep.
Any additional questions as it relates to the NVTI courses? Like I said, we take the questions and we provide a Q&A document, and Brandon, as a part of the G&T team, will be a part of that and answering the questions so we can send them back out. Specific to homework requirements, that might be something we can address in the Q&A doc, right, Brandon?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Chris.
Perfect. Thank you, Brandon.
You bet.
All right, VPL 0424 HVRP Award Amendments. All right, so written approvals in the form of a notice of award is issued by the grant officer for any changes to the grant award that requires prior approval in order for them to take effect are listed in this policy. Any changes that require grant officer approval, we do request that the grant recipients submit them 30 days in advance of their proposed effective date, budget modifications, changes to the service delivery area, goals, etc. And that gives your GOTR, the regional office, and the grant officer processing time, and also enough headway for you guys to be prepared to incorporate the changes that you're requiring prior approval for. The list of policies that are on here are no longer on the VET's active policy directory. Mainly the one that our grant recipients referenced most in the last few years was VPL 0618 Change 1. It was what covered grant modifications and what documents were required. Since we bought into the platform grant solutions for our award management, mods are now synonymous to amendments, and amendments to the grant award, which were previously called modifications, all require grant officer approval. There's no amendments. You don't call them amendments to awards unless they require grant officer approval. So the only way that you make a amendment or a mod is through the grant solutions that results in the execution and the issuance of an NOA. I know the term is loosely used of making modifications or changes to your award, but there is no true change unless the grant officer issues that NOA once the amendment is submitted in grant solutions. Unique to this VPL, like the predecessors that are listed on here, is we provide our grant recipients with a technical assistance guide and a desk guide. The policy more is the what and what not as it relates to the amendment requirements or lack thereof to change your award. The technical assistance guide gives that depth behind why VETS requires a change to be in the criteria to change it. And then we took a desk guide because it gives us the flexibility to hang that on the HVRP website, provide instructions for our grant recipients to follow when preparing documents. And if there is a business process that necessitates change, changing the desk guide doesn't require the policy requirements to have revisions. So when you have some changes to a standard form, if it's the 424, it's the 424A, or one of the other documents, we want to be able to make that current and have the instructions take effect immediately rather than going through the cycle of revising and updating policy. As you know, many of our grant recipients do know on this call, that it does take a while to revise and update federal policies. And so we're happy to deliver these two to you today. So what does this policy do is it creates two categories of amendments for HVRP. Incremental funding, which is supported by the annual release of the Grant Officer Memorandum. Recently, prior to the holiday season, it was Grant Officer Memorandum 0124 and the Technical Assistance Guide. And then general amendments. Those are supported by this VPL. The tag that accompanies is it on the active policy directory and the amendments desk guide that is on the HVRP website. All amendments are proposals until approved by the grant officer. Approvals for amendments are issued via the issuance of the notice of award. Any change that you request that requires the grant officer approval in order for it to take effect, will be listed in either the NOA package, which for some of you that's beginning their journey of HVRP in year one, may contain multiple pages because it has your entire HVRP base award in it, or it may be a few pages, but as it relates to what the grant officer changed or approved, item 30 in the notice of award for all of our grants that are administered through Grant Solutions contains the remarks, and that's where the grant officer basically states what was changed or how to proceed. Your GODR is not authorized to change any of the terms or conditions of the award or approve requests that require prior approval. Any changes to the terms and conditions or prior approvals must be approved by the grant officer. So the GODR is in you should all know from our post-award conference to now, is the go-between your active project and the grant officer. So, and they're also your subject matter expert, and they are able to analyze these policies, provide you assistance with filling out these forms and documents and understanding whether or not the specific changes or what you're trying to achieve with an amendment does require grant officer approval. This policy supports the use of the HVRP budget narrative template, requires the use of the HVRP Award Amendments change a request form when grant recipients are requesting to change their planned goals or their service delivery areas. And then, as I said before, this VPL tells you when an amendment is not required, as well as many grant recipient organizations for HVRP, either at the base award or when they receive their incremental funding award for their second or third year, they might receive a condition of award, and we address compliance with that within this policy as well. So again, this is more of what's changed from previous modification or amendment VPLs to this one. For general amendments, we've eliminated the term scope of work. It was replaced with statement of work. It defines what vets considers a change of that. It was hard for vets to define scope of work. It let people interpret what was the scope of the grant and pretty much left it up to, well, when in doubt, request approval for it. Well, we don't want to bog down our grant recipients and our federal staff for paperwork that might be unnecessary. We do list the unanticipated circumstances that would require a grant recipient proposing to change their goals. And our criteria for that is compelling circumstances that may be on the reasonable management control of the grant recipient. That was addressed in a separate VPL that now is all in one. There's no longer going to be 3, 4, 5 policy documents that covers amendments. It adds the criteria for the period of performance extension when a grant recipient's program is adversely affected by a major disaster or emergency. It's the reality out there, especially with, right now the country's like a state of freeze. I'm in Massachusetts where we get snow right now, but there are things that throughout the year that adversely affect different areas of the country, and we have to be cognizant of that when you're trying to operate your HVRP program that could be adversely affected. So there is a criteria for which we will lend consideration for extending the period of performance. We eliminated the term critical personnel because that, again, was broadly used, and some grant recipients were saying, well, I'm changing my lead case manager, so here's an amendment. No, it defines key personnel, which is the authorized representative to enter into agreement with Department of Labor, and the point of contact. Those two names, those titles are listed on the notice of award. When those two change, you must submit an amendment. So the tag itself is aligned with the VPL to give you guidance on each type of amendment that we list. The VPL itself does not have that degree of detail that a grant recipient would be accustomed to. That's why that we have the tag that accompanies it that talks about these 4 areas of general amendments. So, not requiring an amendment. No longer requires grant recipients to receive concurrence from their GOTR to change the budget that doesn't require grant officer approval. You still have to tell your GOTR what changes you're going to make, even if it doesn't require an amendment, but you no longer have to seek concurrence from them in order to make that change. This policy also declares what VETS considers our total budget period for HVRP, and that's to be each program year within the period of performance. It also addresses that VETS considers the federal share of the project to be the total amount of funding requested for the entire 3-year period of performance. And it's the grant's total amount for the 3-year period of performance is considered against the simplified acquisition threshold, which in policy in 2 CFR, it's for the purposes of not requiring an amendment. If the total award is $250,000 or less, you're not required to seek prior approval for transfers that would exceed 10%. VETS considers that entire 3-year period of performance against that $250,000. Come to mind, we do have, I believe, one $75,000 a year grant that for the 3-year period of performance would be less than $250,000. Best way to check is your grant. If it's at the simplified acquisition threshold or less, look at your VETS 704 abstract. Add up the 3 program years, and if the amount is less than $250,000, you do not need prior approval for any budget realignments. Speaking on this call, there's not too many of the grant projects that are aligned with that, but we better define it now rather than place a footnote saying C2 CFR, and VETS doesn't formally address the policy that is in 2 CFR. Personnel line changes. Changes to HVRP staff positions, the percentage of time charge do not require an amendment unless the changes result in a change of 10% or more among direct cost categories or a change to the statement of work. We talk about change to the statement of work. You look at your technical proposal. If you're trying to your program's trying to address veterans experiencing homelessness in a different manner, which was improved, deploying different types, hiring different types of staff to meet certain needs, it may require prior approval, but then check with your GOTR. They'll be able to go through the motions of reading the tag with you and determining whether or not your specific situation or circumstance would need prior approval from the grant officer. And another area where we sought to reduce paperwork was the changes to negotiate indirect cost rate, cost allocation plan, or the election to use the de minimis rate. If your newly approved rate is expected to result in moving more than 10% of the grant award amongst cost categories, then an amendment would be required. But if it's simply providing with a renewal of your already approved rate, or your rate changes to which it doesn't affect the budget 10% or less, then you don't need an amendment to incorporate a new agreement. The tag itself, Christina, from my my G&T counterpart, can you drop the tag? She already did.
Chris,
Thank you so much.
I dropped it. Yeah, no worries. You got the desk guide, the tag, and the VPL are all in the chat for anyone to click on.
All right, thank you. And it's like NASA here in my basement in Mission Command. So I just had to look to a screen to my left, and I saw Christina took care of me a little while ago. Thank you so much. All right, so the tag, please open up the second hyperlink. The tag itself, as I said, it's a detailed description of each general amendment listed in the VPL Section 5, provides the criteria for the requirements for statement of work changes, details the requirements for administrative change, and we provide you, instead of a million words that tells you what documents need to be with what amendment that corresponds to the grant solutions radio button that you select for your amendment type, we put a nice little table together. And this table, if you read it on the blue from left to right, you have the different types of awards that are outlined in VPL 0424. The required documents, minimally required is a check mark without an asterisk. These different types of awards can have changes to certain forms. So that's what I say, it's if affected or if information's changed naturally that you would include it. Each grant solutions amendment type may not line up in terms of what VETS calls them, is because grant solutions in itself is a platform for many different federal departments and agencies to use. So we did our best to align with the amendment type that we require in policy to what grant solutions is gonna call for. And this is an easy way to walk through what amendment corresponds to the type and the documents that you need to have submitted. One thing of note is that as we grow as a program and using this system, and the GOTers provide you with technical assistance, you may find that it might be suited for you to have multiple changes that require grant officer approval by submitting one amendment. Just be mindful that when you do so and you're receiving coaching from your GOTer is that not every amendment selection type has the required forms and documents in them. The reason why I say this, if you're doing a statement of work change, in itself is an application area where you can load documents, but it's not going to have the online SF424A. So if you are doing a budget realignment and you're going to do a statement of work change or a change in authorized rep, we do require the use of the online 424 and the 424A. So select that amendment type. And again, these are coaching points for with your GOTer to work directly with you. I'm not expecting you to memorize this, but yeah, choose the one that is applicable. It is minimally applicable to one of the changes that you're trying to make that does contain the online forms. And the reason why we're requiring the online forms is there's a back end to the system that takes the data and information that you put into those online forms and it breaks out your budget, and that's what populates your notice of award. Same thing with the SF424. When you originally, for the grant recipients who have new awards this year, you're the first grant recipients that were awarded and applied using this grant solution system. And you'll notice that some of your information is pre-populated, and that's because you chose to use the online SF424. It makes things more efficient for everyone by using those online forms. Certainly, if you have some hiccups, your GOTer's there as well as the Grant Solutions help desk. So getting to Grant Solutions, just note that right here, you do see hyperlinks, but in order for us to be 508 compliant with this presentation that we give in a PDF, we cannot display URLs. So these bullets will be hyperlinked, and those are the URLs to grab the training resources, the frequently asked questions, and Grant Solutions is going to have the most up-to-date grant recipient training. The training materials that VETS has is dated from when VETS and Grant Solutions were originally onboarding last program year, and some of the interfaces may have changed. I know that some on this call, there's the option to toggle between the classic view and the new view, and those training materials essentially are dated. So Grant Solutions is really ramping up their assistance to grant recipients. They actually have live recorded demos, and their quick sheets are getting a lot better than when VETS and HVRP started out and using them. I'm going to pause for questions right now as we're halfway through our hour together, and the next segment we're going to roll into is incremental funding applications, which are due to your GOTer next month. Outstanding. And if anyone is tabling questions for the end, or it may be specific to a situation broadly with your grant organization, certainly do enter it in the chat. The worst thing we can say is we will ensure to cover it through the robust Q&A. I love having that Q&A because it memorializes the presentations as well as allows us to collaborate with VETS's grant officer in terms of getting that like solid concrete response that you all may need in order to effectively administer your grant. So with all right, Christina, you are populating our hyperlinks for the next presentation. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Just needed a quick sip of water. All right, Christina has popped in Grant Officer Memorandum 0124, the incremental funding procedures for program year 24, and its tag. So the two types of amendments, you have incremental funding and then you have general amendments. We will get to the point where incremental funding will not have a tag, and that it will have a have that desk guide that complements it. However, this year, specific to incremental funding and the ability to deliver the updated policy document for general amendments, we do have a tag that is specific for incremental funding. So that means when you're completing this application, I'm getting a little static. Is that me? Or do we have a hot mic? I think we have a hot mic because no one's backing up in my basement. Perfect. Thank you. So when you are completing an incremental funding amendment application, you will follow this tag. When you're completing general amendments, you're following the tag for HVRP Award Amendments and the desk guide. Next year, if the grants and training leadership agrees, that our desk guide will be revised as it can be, and we will hang incremental funding specific document requirements. It's just to walk them through the if process there rather than having a tag to avoid confusion. That way our processes won't change from year to year. It's just with the grant officer memorandum specific to incremental funding, there are some things that that will change that we like to add in here, and you'll see what we mean by that. So here's the agenda for the session. As I said, when questions come to mind, you can raise your hand or enter your questions in the chat. I'll try to answer them, or I'll try to get them at the robust Q&A within the coming weeks. Similar to last year, if those of you were on the incremental funding training, the slides are similar. We're not going to have a live demonstration from Grant Solutions. However, I was able to grab a lot of the elements that they have in their step guides to be able to walk folks through. So, grant recipients pursuing incremental funding must submit an incremental funding amendment in Grant Solutions for their GOTR to review no later than the close of business February 20th. Yep, we heard you loud and clear. We're not going to compete with quarterly reports. I understand last year it was tough for everyone, especially going through a new process using a new system. You know, now that we're going into the fourth year. HVRP now has a 36-month period of performance. It's incrementally funded on an annual basis. You receive your first increment at your base award in years 2 and years 3 are received through an annual amendment process in Grant Solutions. The funding for years 2 and years 3, it can't be greater than what you placed in your VET 704 abstract. So simple for everyone here is that if you applied for a grant that was $1.5 million total award for $500,000 for each program year within the 3-year period of performance, you receive your base award, and then every year we issue a grant officer memorandum with a suspense date to collect your funding application for the next increment. We have a question. Has the notice for incremental funding come out, or is this the notice? The notice was posted to VET's Active Policy Directory on December 22nd with instructions for GOTRs to alert their grant recipients. This is the training for that notice. We wanted to accomplish it after the holidays, and given the timing of the release of the document, close of business being 5 p.m. Eastern time, as it relates to what? For the suspense? 5 p.m. Eastern time would work with your goater, depending on the coast that you're at and the time zone. Just work with them. Close of business to us here is generally 5 o'clock in the Eastern time zone, but I don't want to speak for any situations or circumstances where you may or may not be able to meet that. Okay, Dr. Chambers, we did not get the announcement until this notice of training. Okay, what is understood, Dr. Chambers? What is the due date for the incremental funding application? The due date for the incremental funding application will always be listed in the policy, and that due date is February 20th, 2024. So again, this may be new, others this might not be new. The incremental funding amendment submitted in the system pertains to program year 24, which is your funding increment from July 1st, 2024 to June 30th, 2025. Review your current approved packet. Conditions of awards from program year 23, if you receive them, should be referenced so that the same errors and omissions do not get placed within your PY 24 incremental funding amendment application. So my example of that is if you have a miscategorized cost that resulted in a condition of award, meaning that you needed to revise your other section or your supplies, and that was a condition, you submitted an amendment in the system to comply with that condition, then you would not necessarily use that same exact budget narrative to apply for incremental funding in 24 that had that cost that required revision. So just be mindful that of version control when you do submit these incremental funding applications. Vets, SCOTers, and regional office and myself, we're kind of whizzes with these because we get anywhere between, last year was 87, the year before was 121. So we are able to identify some of the pitfalls that grant recipients go through, and through the period of time between now and when they're due in February 20th, please keep an open mind in any type of coaching that you receive. It's to get the best product to go through the first time to get approved in order to ensure that you receive your funding on July 1st. So review GO Memo 0124 and the tag. When VETS publishes through the Active Policy Directory, we do request that the goaters provide that information to their grant recipients. We understand that that is not communicated to everyone, so making note of that, we will look at ways to improve our communications so that there is no organization left behind. And for those of you who are just finding out about this policy that has been out for almost a month now, we'll be sure that we have a greater presence with our distribution. And with that said, please do be sure that you are receiving the NVTI and NVTAC emails. If you did not receive the listening session materials from December, that email went out about around 1 o'clock this afternoon, then you're going to want to contact NVTAC to make sure that you are on their mailing list. That way you won't miss these resources and tools that we put out for this policy. So evaluate your budget in your award. If your program is submitting its year 2 incremental funding application, be sure to reference your award that was issued under the current funding opportunity announcement. If you're submitting your request for year 3, refer to your prior program year, which is the program year 23 that you're in, for the most current information to compare with your request. You're only using your prior award information as a guide because there are certain costs that aren't reoccurring and that grant recipients kind of have a pitfall, is that, like, if you're purchasing a laptop or laptops for 3 staff and it's a 3-year grant, that wouldn't be an annual cost because laptops generally have a useful life of greater than 1 year. Also, if there's any reference to one-time charges that a grant needs to incur because it is a 3-year grant, by simply submitting the same budget documents from your prior program year because they were approved, VETS reads and analyzes these and has a very robust and comprehensive checklist. Though that is a reason for flagging and returning. So, is your program still spending funds as carryover in accordance with VPL 24? VETS monitors drawdowns against all active awards. Engoders and grant recipients should review balances against funds needed for the program in PY 24. There are grant recipients in their second year of their period of performance still using their first year's increment of funds while not even using their second. So when you apply for your third year's funding increment, you should consider the amount of funds available that be used in PY 24 and request the difference, almost an offset. The programmatic savings will go to the program via the funding opportunity announcement. It will continue to assist veterans in experiencing homelessness under this year's funding opportunity announcement. Applying for funds that you do not need, based on your budget in consideration of how much carryover you have, does take away from the program. Required documents. So from last year to this year, we don't need a copy of your indirect cost rate agreement or your cost allocation plan to prove that it's current. Grant recipients must follow VPL 0424 as it relates to providing updates to your indirect cost rate or your cost allocation plan. This is what's required: the transmittal memorandum, the SF 424, the 424A, and your budget narrative. Project narrative, if applicable, the HVRP Award Amendments change request form, if applicable. Those are not required if there are no changes, and if any of the things that you're requesting don't meet the requirements of 0424 or are not specific to the incremental funding procedures for PY24, then don't submit them and do not complete them. The transmittal memorandum. At the time you submitted your grant application, you were required to list future funding for your second and third program year. It's in your abstract. VETS budgets our program based on those increments. But as we said before, 2 slides ago, review your unobligated balances against your needs for program year 24. It is okay to request less. So, special performance requirement for program year 24. In program year 24, that is beginning July 1, VETS will remove the 80% goal applicable to all grant recipients. Grant recipients, in turn, must use the transmittal memorandum in their incremental funding amendment application to declare their percentage of enrollments trained cumulative goal for program year 24 and beyond. The grant recipient can set their goal between 55 and 100% rounded to the nearest whole number without decimals. That will be your percentage of enrollment trains once the program year starts in PY 24. You should consider your current and past performance for establishing your goal. Just like with applying for an HVRP grant under a funding opportunity announcement, you establish your goals. The 80% that we had was VETS's, like, it's a baseline, it's applicable to all grant recipients. In PY 24, we are starting with the grant recipients, much like their other indicators, is you develop your own. You will still be held accountable for your own goal that you developed in accordance with VPL 0324. So this is one of those I need to make a sticky note type thing to put on my desk for when I develop my transmittal memorandum, is you have to establish your training goal. We do not have a evaluation criteria. So if it's 55%, that's your organization's established goal for program year 24 and beyond. If it's 100%, that's your goal. You will be held to it just like the other performance indicators. So with the 80%, that will go away. It will be effective through the end of this period of performance. So I'm sorry, not the period of performance, through the end of the program year, I misspoke. So it will still be current for Q2, Q3, and Q4 of program year 23. So the SF424, when I talked about the differences in the total award amount abstract, right now we have grant recipients on this call that had an abstract that was Word-based document that's on the right, which you listed your 3 years. And if you applied for your new award and for program year 23 under the 23 funding opportunity announcement, it was an Excel-based VET 704 abstract, and you have year 1, year 2, and year 3. So that based on those increments that you add up in there, that's planned. We plan our annual fiscal budget based on that. You can't exceed it. You can request less, and in some instances, to which last year, being prudent, our grant recipients requested 0 because with the amount of carry-in, it was common with grant recipients that were entering their 3rd year period of performance. For one reason or another, they had enough savings to fund that 3rd year. And they did so via a transmittal memorandum declining to receive incremental funding, but would continue the program because they had a non-obligated balance. We have instructions for those grant recipients in the GOTR to follow for PY24, and it's all in the grant officer memorandum, and it's simply the creation of a transmittal memorandum versus submitting any award amendment documents. Let me go back to this. So requesting incremental funding for your 2nd or 3rd year is an increase of award, regardless of the changes that could be included in your incremental funding amendment request. Last year, the 87 that we had, the block 2 had, everyone was selecting different things. This is why this tag is specific to incremental funding. We're telling you what must be there. As well as what is pre-populated information, and just don't touch it unless it's incorrect. And then you can make the changes, and then you write in the tag why you made the changes. The tag has just about as much detailed information on how to complete this application, line by line, cell by cell, that anyone could need, whether it is a grant recipient organization that's applied for incremental funding since the inception of the 3-year period of performance, or like 9 grant recipients on this call. This is your 1st year in HVRP, so this is the 1st year you're dealing with incremental funding applications. So the 424A, completed online in Grant Solutions, we get that we have leveraged resources and matching funds. Don't blend them in your budget narrative. You can figure out how much you're going to contribute in kind, and we do declare, you can list that in the budget narrative, but don't commingle the funds. It creates a nightmare for our grant officer and our forms to differentiate how much or what percentage of the amount being asked is federal dollars. So leave those out. The 424A in the budget narrative must crosswalk, and it needs to equal the amount that you're asking to fund your program using federal dollars. We had a handful of blended budgets, and it just gets very ugly. So again, the technical assistance guide walks you through every line of the SF424A. We talked with the Office of Grants Management and the grant officer, say, what can we trim the fat for? So if you're going to look in this year's tag, you're going to see that you'll see some NAs, or not required to fill out this section. That's because the standard form, the SF424A, is for a employment and training grant administered by DOL vets, and also a research project administered by Harvard. It's a standard form, it's generalized, it has different purposes, but specifically to HVRP, we're only going to require that you fill out what is important for the HVRP and what's important for the grant officer in order to make the award. So if it is NA, don't complete it, and the goaters have been instructed what is NA and is not going to be completed. The budget narrative, match the SF 424A section by section. Consider using the HVRP budget narrative template that's on the website. It was created to eliminate the errors and omissions that plague budget narratives. The template is clear, concise, has instructions, examples to follow, and it calculates the totals. So grant recipients are no longer going to have their budget narratives kicked back if they utilize this, because it is self-calculating, and it does break down and do the math by columns. So consider using it. It's not required. It's a great tool and resource and can streamline and be the difference between submitting one application or having it get kicked back because of the same things. And those on this call know that sometimes more often than not, we are checking math, and when you have word-based, essentially math problems adding up, there can be errors. So consider using the self-calculating form. It's on the HVRP website, and your goaters will be there to support you with the instructions that are contained. Budget narrative. So we're looking at mitigating risks to duplicative costs from one program year to the next. We do state in the tag is that project startup costs, laptops, office furniture, printers, supplies, things with a useful life of more than 1 year shouldn't be written into your second or third year budget request. That's the same thing I talked about earlier, is just essentially mailing in the incremental funding amendment application by just taking the previous budget and just submitting it for the next if year. We're looking at that, wholly to see that if a grant recipient is starting up and they are buying an entire office that will house the operation, they're not doing that in the same costs in year 2 and year 3. It's not necessary, it's not reasonable, and will be the basis for returning the award. Rebudget. Look at the needs of the participants in the program itself versus purchasing anything that would survive the 3-year period of performance. Unless justification. Laptops do break, all of those things, but please work with your goater. So the project narrative, point of emphasis, if you're requesting to change your statement of work in accordance with VPL 0424 or with this incremental funding amendment, that's when you need the project narrative. Otherwise, it is just another document that makes your package a lot bigger and requires a lot more review. Your actual project narrative is on file under grant history and documents. So the award amendment change request form. So this is only required to be submitted if you're requesting to realign your quarterly goals or to change your cumulative goals or your service delivery area. Last year we had a great form that captured revisions or requested changes. This year we understood that we have grant recipients that may need to revise their SDAs for a certain set of circumstances. So this form and document, it covers our grant recipients from program year 22 and those from program year 23 that have just that difference of goals between the episodic homelessness and the cost per placement. Again, if you're revising your goals amongst quarters or requesting to change your goals to your service delivery area, you complete this. Otherwise, it's not to be completed and it's not to be submitted. So that, as of today, was hung on the HVRP website under program documents. Each row that you complete has instructions. Ken, can't say this more, proposing to change your SDA or your goals, no need to complete. Requesting to change your goals, meaning not revise amongst quarters, but change them, they must meet the requirements of VPL 0424. Sam, What is SAM? It's the System for Award Management. Those of you on the call knows that it's good for 365 days and ensure that it hasn't expired. There were 5 or 6 grant recipients that had a SAM that expired prior to the beginning of the new program year. SAM is connected to all of the other external grant systems. Our grant officer, as much as she would love to, cannot issue that NOA to give you that award increment unless your SAM's current. Grant Solutions will not permit it, and there's no manual way for me to get you that next increment in the payment management system. So even if you prematurely or ahead of time renew your SAM prior to July, make sure it's not going to expire I would say between June 1st and July 30th to be safe. I know we're coming up on the hour. I do have 9 more slides to go. So in consideration of everyone's time, I'm going to press forward, but please ask your questions in the chat and I'll try to address them for those who are willing to stay on, but you are also welcome to drop off. I appreciate spending the afternoon with me, or morning for some. So right now, this part of the presentation is for those who will get this PDF and is a walkthrough. Many of you could have not submitted an amendment at all in Grant Solutions, let alone an incremental funding one. So these are the system steps in order to get to the amendment screen. And by following them, step 1 through 4, you will get to submitting the forms and documents that's required for the incremental funding amendment. The amendment type that's available to you is the category, and that's critical for this, is because this is the only time of the year that a grant recipient for HVRP will be requesting incremental funding. And when you go to apply for incremental funding, it's no other type of amendment. It's just incremental funding, and we need to be able to for you to select that, because we have to track 126 of them. So once you select incremental funding, this is your application control checklist. This is where you upload all of the required forms and documents. So the online forms you enter and complete online, the documents you upload, and then if you have other attachments, depending on the situation and circumstance, you would upload them there. The budget narrative worksheet and the HVRP amendment request change form, they are XLB files, binary files, I think, and that type of file is acceptable to upload. And I would just be mindful that when you go ahead and view it, you want to view it as its original attachment and not as its uploaded version, because the preservation of how the form looks might be altered just based on how Grant Solutions reads the file. So Goders don't have the capability within the Grant Solutions system to return any submitted amendments. So what does that mean? That was something that we had last year, where if you had an incremental funding amendment application, the Goder would review it and return it. Some of the things that happened last year was the Goder did not have the ability to return the amendment to the grant recipient. And because of that, grant recipients would submit a second or third version. Like, for instance, if your application didn't have one document in it, or it was wrong, you just went ahead and submitted another. Well, your grant profile will have 3 incremental funding amendment applications, and your Goder will be asking you which one's correct. Well, we met with Grant Solutions during the middle of the incremental funding process last year and found out and worked away so the Goders can return amendments. It's critical to know that they have that capability. So if you do make an error, contact your Goder and ask for it to be returned instead of submitting a second or third amendment, because it essentially creates a record and it creates a file. You want to submit one incremental funding amendment application in the system. It can be returned and resubmitted multiple times, but please do not submit multiple. And if you do have multiple grants as an organization, be sure that you are submitting under the correct grant number. We did get a couple of grant applications that were uploaded under the wrong grant. So just be mindful that you are corresponding your amendment application to the correct grant. So conditions of awards. Many of our grant recipients are familiar with these. That means the grant officer approved the award with conditions that must be met within a predetermined amount of time. Grant recipients not meeting their conditions and timeline run the risk of impacting their funding. Yes, that is because our grant recipients, some do still have outstanding conditions of awards from program year 23. Not resolving those budget issues creates further delay, because if you're operating on a budget where the grant officer said you must revise these costs or demonstrate allowability and reasonableness, and you haven't done so, it's going to hold up the impact in your ability to draw on your new award. So please be sure that you are working expeditiously and effectively to resolve all your conditions of award so it doesn't impact the availability of your funding. So reduce some common reasons the grant officer imposes conditions. You know, our grant recipients are going to be going in year 3. Congratulations, because of the 87 incremental funding amendment applications, only 9 had conditions of awards. Previous to that, there were 66. So review the budget narrative, ensure you're checking for allowable, reasonable costs. If you have any questions as to that, talk to your GOTR. The GOTR will either have the subject matter expertise to give you the answer, or they'll talk to their regional office. And if the regional office doesn't have the answer, we surely will. Ensure your items are accounted for, clearly relayed, allowable, and that the figures in the budget narrative match the SF424A and the 424. There have been times where we have a $500,000 SF424 and the 424A is for like $484,000, and then the budget narrative adds up to like $365,000. It's a big product, these amendment applications to complete, but just be sure that what you're asking for in the 424A is broken out by object class category and then substantiated by the budget narrative, and that all 3 of those documents crosswalk to the total amount of the award. If your program uses the de minimis rate, ensure your program is properly accounting for its modified total direct costs. Any grant recipient that had issues with their modified total direct cost base surely received a condition of award. Our folks with the grant officer and OGM really look for that. If you have any questions as to what is and was what not considered in your modified total direct cost base, look at your current approved award, unless you have a condition that's unresolved for that, and then look at your terms and conditions. Also consult your GOTR, because your modified total direct costs, if you are looking to have some significant revisions for program year 24, ensure your base remains the same. Otherwise, it will result in a condition of award if it's incorrect, or the GOTR may request that it be returned. Check out 2 CFR 200, the uniform guidance. We try to do a good job by hyperlinking it in our policy documents and technical assistance guides. It is to the actual website where it maintains the most current version. But if you are a 2 CFR 200 guru and love getting into the regulations, just be sure that you're using the current version. So questions. If we're unable to address any questions today, and I know we're 8 minutes over, forward your questions to your GOTR. Your GOTR will answer your questions, and your inquiry could be forwarded to the regional office and to us. We have over 30 days until the incremental funding amendments are due to your GOTR. I'm glad that we are able to afford the program this time to be able to get the listening session Q&A presentation off to you, and then take a deep dive into this policy, this tag, how it affects your organization, how it affects your grant program. Familiarize yourself with, if you want to adopt the HVRP budget narrative template, give yourself time. Over a month is not a lot of time. It's just over 20 something working days, and you have a holiday mixed in. So pace yourself. These applications are very detail oriented. That's why our tag is so long, but our coders do a fantastic job in providing you a review and analysis to ensure that this application goes through, is processed timely, and you have your awards ready to start program year 24. So I will pause for questions. Did I miss any as I went through these slides a little bit faster than I wanted to?
There's a whole bunch of questions in the chat.
A whole bunch of questions in the chat. Okay. All right. So what we will do is, and I apologize. We should have stopped for a couple of these. What I will do is, for the sake of time, will address these in the Q&A document, and I'll be sure that we can expedite this presentation, the Q&A document, and the recording over to you. So if those that want to drop off, they can. Where can we, and I'll go from the most recent up, where can we access Grant Officer Memorandum 0124? I did not receive an email on December 22nd. Christina, when you redrop the policies in this chat, where can we access the slides and recording audio of the meeting once it's posted? Christina, drop that in the chat. Please, with these hyperlinks, before we close out, take the opportunity to bookmark these. Even in my position, I rely on the bookmarks to every single policy that comes out, where our listening sessions are stored, because there is a ton of information with this program. Mailing lists. All right, Martin is from 242. Are there recommended types of training or not recommended types of training that has been changed to the 55 to 100%? No. The goal itself and the parameters that you establish no longer has a straight 80%. The type of training that qualifies against that to meet that requirement has not changed. What has changed is VETS is establishment of the goal for you to be set at 80%, whereas you set your own. If we will not obligate all of our funds this year, do we estimate an amount and then put this amount into the 424-424A in budget narrative, or should we still request the full amount we would like to be funded? Martin, I would talk to your GODER and also work within your organization to see how much you have left, what your costs are going to be from program year 24, and what sort of amount remains from prior program years that could be used as an offset. One of the things I do want to caution you with is that once these funds are committed by our program for FY24, that your estimates need to be as precise as possible, because there won't be an opportunity to request extra money for next program year if your forecast was too low. So look at what you have, look at your 12-month budget that you have for your first and second program year, and the simple example that we have for our grant recipients is that, during COVID, there were operational costs that were not utilized. So realistically, just one scenario, like a grant recipient had such underruns from COVID as that third program year, because they were a smaller operation, they were able to afford it just from savings of being able to only expend 50% of their funds from the first year and the second year. So then they essentially bought a third program year from having enough money to FIFO. Your organization, the organization knows its budget, its costs, and how to expend money, burn rates, and all that all that. So I'm not going to be able to coach your organization on that, but certainly work with your go-to. We can look at like how to forecast and, give you some sort of guidance based on our financial databases and reports on what could be practical. We've been awarded an IVTP grant, the DOL contract. This is a grant, not a contract. I just want to let you know, I am reading from here. Tells us to put in the full amount on the full 424, 424A, et cetera, for all 3 years. Is that the case with the submission only for 1 year? I don't believe our funding opportunity announcement has asked to put the full amount for the 3 years in any SF 424 or 424A since 2020. And if that had occurred with your award, we would likely have issued a condition of award and tell you to submit a 1-year budget. And our current guidance, Sarah, who's led the development of the last 2 FOAs, is that we are collecting an SF 424 and a 424A for 1 program year, correct? She must have dropped.
Yeah.
But yes, it is. We do collect 1-year budgets. We wouldn't collect for all 3 years. So in the instance of this IVTP grant, talk to your GOTR and we can work with you to resolve any of these questions. But it will be covered in the Q&A that we put out. The due date for the incremental funding application is February 20th. We will look at improving the communications as it relates to the announcement of future listening sessions and the releases of policy. I am pretty much caught up to where Brandon ended. And thank you, grants and training team, for supporting me with the resources in the chat. Has everybody had the opportunity that's still on the line to bookmark them?
Chris, we have one last question. It was, will requesting less in 2nd or 3rd year of this project period result in less funding being awarded in subsequent project periods when applying for a 3-year grant?
So when you apply for an HVRP grant based upon your SF 424, 424A and budget narrative, provided that your application scores high enough to be awarded, we award based on what you requested. Past performance consideration for our HVRP grants in previous funding opportunity announcements has not considered whether or not a grant recipient has requested less in the incremental funding process. And that is not a consideration as it relates to the current funding opportunity announcement, especially considering the one that was just awarded under the 23 FOA. The inability to or the requesting of less funds is not a factor. So if you do apply for a new 3-year award, it will be based on the criteria that's in the funding opportunity announcement and not whether or not a grant recipient requested an incremental funding year 24.
No other questions? You're good to go.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. The next HVRP listening session will be scheduled within the quarter, April through June. We've had these back-to-backs, but it was considered quarterly, even though you were with us for December and January. So thank you so much for taking the time today. We will work hard to get the Q&A presentation and recording out to everyone so you have ample time to work with your GODER and your staff or to get your incremental funding amendment applications forward, and that you're able to digest and understand VPL 0424 as it relates to the general award amendments that require grant officer approval. So thank you so much for your time today. And another question, when is the new grant expected, the notice of funding opportunity? So the funding opportunity announcement, Martin, it's undergoing the clearance process. And once the funding opportunity announcement is released, there will be a prospective applicant webinar that will be able to answer questions on the funding opportunity announcement that is posted in grants.gov. So stay tuned for that. We will ensure widest communication. So, you know, again, Martin, I do appreciate all your comments and questions today. So thank you so much for participating. And with that said, anything else? The upcoming $600,000 ceiling for awards PY24 beginning July 1st, 2024. There is no retroactivity. It is for grants that begin July 1st, 2024 that will have a $600,000 per year ceiling for program year 24, 25, and 26 under that funding opportunity announcement. That funding opportunity announcement is budgeted against what VETS anticipates to have for FY24, subject to the availability, as well as in consideration of your grants that are applying for their second and third year increments, that the maximum amounts we take are from your year 2 or your year 3 from your VET 704 abstract. So I have all that information. I have the totals for the grants entering year 2 and year 3, and that's really how we formulate our budget, and then how much available is in the pot. So no, there is no retroactive to the 600,000, but the grants that apply for incremental funding in 25 that were awarded year 1 and 24 will still have up into that ceiling for year 2 and year 3. All right. Ski Tennyson, grants.gov indicates the 2024 FOA will be announced today. Those are estimated, estimated date, and that is just an estimated date. We had to enter that as a placeholder as far as a system thing that goes through in terms of the clearance process. So the FOA is not released yet. Once it's released, it will be widely communicated to all. And just stay tuned. All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day.